Quantum immortality. Thought experiment or terrifying possibility. What if I told you that right now, as you're watching this video, there might be countless other versions of you living completely different lives? What if every dangerous moment you have ever survived, every close call while driving, every time you almost fell down the stairs, every split second where things could have gone wrong, actually did go wrong in some other reality? And what if the only reason you are here, alive and watching this, is because your consciousness can only exist in the versions of reality where you survived? This is not science fiction. Well, not entirely. This is the mind-bending concept of quantum immortality, an idea that emerges from some of the strangest corners of modern physics. It suggests that you might already be immortal, not because of some future technology or magical power, but because of the very nature of reality itself. Imagine this scenario. You are crossing the street and a car comes speeding toward you. In our everyday understanding, either you get hit or you do not. But quantum immortality suggests something far more bizarre, that reality splits into multiple versions. In some versions, you are tragically killed. But in at least one version, something miraculous happens. Maybe the car swerves at the last second. Maybe you jump out of the way with superhuman reflexes. Or maybe the car mysteriously breaks down just before impact. According to this theory, your consciousness only continues in that survival branch, while the versions where you died simply end. But here is where it gets even stranger. If this is true, then every time you have faced danger throughout your entire life, you have been unconsciously selecting the reality where you survive. You're not just lucky, you are quantum immortal. And as you age, as the odds of survival become smaller and smaller, the realities where you continue to exist become more and more unlikely, more and more strange. Today, we're going to dive deep into this fascinating and frankly terrifying possibility. We will explore where this idea comes from, what science says about it, and what it could mean for how we understand life, death, and our place in the universe. We will look at the philosophical questions it raises about consciousness, identity, and what it means to be human. And we will imagine what a world where quantum immortality is real might look like. By the end of this video, you might never think about close calls the same way again. You might start wondering, how many times have I already died? How many versions of me are no longer here? And if I really am quantum immortal, what does that mean for how I should live my life? So buckle up, we're about to take a journey through the multiverse, where death might not be the end, but just another road not taken. The science behind the madness. To understand quantum immortality, we need to start with one of the weirdest discoveries in the history of science. Back in the early 1900s, scientists studying the tiniest particles in the universe, things like electrons and photons, discovered something that completely broke our understanding of how reality works. They found that these tiny particles do not behave like the objects we are used to. When no one is watching, an electron does not have a specific location or a definite state. Instead, it exists in what physicists call a superposition. It is essentially in all possible states at the same time. It is like a coin that is spinning in the air. Until it lands, it is neither heads nor tails, but somehow both. This led to the famous thought experiment called Schrödinger's cat. Imagine a cat in a sealed box with a device that has a 50% chance of killing the cat based on a random quantum event. According to quantum mechanics, until you open the box to check, the cat is in a superposition. It is both alive and dead at the same time. Only when you look does reality decide which state is real. Now, most scientists accepted this weird behavior as just how the quantum world works. But in the 1950s, a physicist named Hugh Everett had a radical idea. He asked, what if reality does not actually choose one outcome? What if every possible outcome actually happens, but in separate parallel universes? This became known as the many worlds interpretation. Instead of the cat being alive or dead, Everett suggested that when you open the box, the universe splits into two versions. In one universe, you see a living cat. In another universe, you see a dead cat. Both are equally real. You just happen to experience only one of them. If this sounds crazy, you are not alone. Most physicists initially rejected this idea because it seemed too strange and impossible to test. But over the decades, more and more scientists have begun to take it seriously. Today, some of the world's leading physicists, including Nobel Prize winners, consider the many worlds interpretation to be a legitimate possibility. Here is where it gets interesting for us humans. If the many worlds theory is correct, then every quantum event, and there are trillions happening every second, splits reality into multiple branches. And some of these quantum events can have big consequences for our daily lives. Think about it this way. Every chemical reaction in your body involves quantum mechanics. Every time light hits your eyes, quantum events are involved. The random mutations in your DNA that can cause cancer or prevent it, those involve quantum mechanics too. If many worlds is true, then there are countless versions of you right now living in slightly different realities. Now here is where quantum immortality comes in. In the 1980s, physicists like Max Tegmark started thinking about what many worlds would mean for life and death. They realized that if every quantum event creates new universes, then every time you face a life or death situation, reality branches into versions where you live and versions where you die. But here is the crucial part. Your consciousness, your subjective experience of being you, can only continue in the branches where you survive. The versions of you that die simply stop experiencing anything. So from your perspective, you always end up in the survival branch, no matter how unlikely it might be. This does not mean you are invincible in the usual sense. In most of the branching universes, you might die from that car accident or that illness. But there will always be some universes, however improbable, where you survive. Maybe the car breaks down at the last second. Maybe the cancer mysteriously goes into remission. Maybe you slip and fall down the stairs but somehow land in exactly the right way to avoid serious injury. The result. From your subjective experience, you seem to live forever, always finding yourself in increasingly unlikely but survivable situations. You're not actually immortal. Versions of you are dying all the time in parallel universes, but the you that experiences life always continues in the survival branches. It is important to note that this is still just a theory. We have no way to prove that parallel universes exist, and many scientists remain skeptical. But if it is true, it would mean that death as we understand it might not be the end of our conscious experience, just the end of our experience in this particular universe. The philosophical mind-bender. Now that we understand the basic science, let us dive into the philosophical rabbit hole that quantum immortality creates. Because if this theory is even remotely possible, it changes everything about how we think about life, death, and what it means to be human. Let us start with the biggest question. What is you? Right now, you probably feel like there is one continuous you that has existed from birth until this moment. You have memories, personality traits, preferences, and a sense of being a single unified person. But quantum immortality suggests something much more complex and frankly disturbing. If reality is constantly branching, then there is not just one you. There are countless versions of you existing right now in parallel universes. Some of these versions are almost identical to you, differing only in tiny details. Maybe in one universe you chose tea instead of coffee this morning. In another you wore a different shirt. But as time goes on and more quantum events occur, these versions of you start to diverge more and more. This creates what philosophers call the identity problem. If there are millions of versions of you, which one is the real you? Are they all equally you? When you make a decision, are you responsible for what all the other versions do? This is not just an academic question. It has real implications for how we think about morality and responsibility. Consider this scenario. You are driving, and you see someone who needs help on the side of the road. You have to decide whether to stop and help or keep driving. In a quantum immortality multiverse, both choices happen. In some universes, you stop and help. In others, you drive by. Are you morally responsible for the actions of all these versions of yourself, or only the version you are currently experiencing? Then there is the question of death itself. Throughout human history, the fear of death has been one of our most fundamental experiences. It has driven us to create art, build monuments, have children, and search for meaning. We have invented religions and philosophies largely to help us cope with our mortality. But what if death is just an illusion? Quantum immortality suggests that from your perspective, you never actually die. You just keep finding yourself in the universes where you survive. But this raises some truly disturbing questions. What happens as you get older? As your body ages, the probability of survival in any given dangerous situation gets smaller and smaller. To keep surviving, you would need to end up in increasingly improbable scenarios. Imagine being 90 years old and having a heart attack. In most universes, this might be fatal. But in the universes where you survive, maybe the paramedics arrive with impossible speed, or maybe you have a miraculous recovery that doctors cannot explain. The older you get, the more bizarre and unlikely your survival becomes. This leads to what some philosophers call the nightmare scenario of quantum immortality. You might find yourself trapped in a reality where you are extremely old, possibly in pain, but unable to die because you're always shifting to the universes where you barely survive. Instead of a peaceful death, you could be condemned to an existence of endless, unlikely survivals in increasingly strange scenarios. There is also the question of everyone else in your life. If quantum immortality is true, then it applies to everyone, not just you. But the probability of any two people surviving the same series of unlikely events becomes incredibly small. This means that as time goes on, the people around you in your immortal universe branch might become increasingly different from the ones you originally knew, or you might find yourself increasingly alone, as you're the only one who keeps surviving in your particular branch. Some philosophers argue that quantum immortality could make people more reckless. If you believe you will always survive in some universe, why be careful? Why wear a seatbelt or avoid dangerous activities? But this thinking ignores a crucial point. Even if you survive in one universe, versions of you are still dying in countless others. Your recklessness could cause immense suffering across the multiverse. There is also the question of whether quantum immortality would actually feel like immortality. You would not remember the branches where you died. Those versions of your consciousness would simply end. From your perspective, you might just seem incredibly lucky. You might not even realize that you are quantum immortal until you start noticing a pattern of improbable survivals. Perhaps most unsettling is the question of authenticity. If you are constantly shifting between universes, are your experiences real? Are the people around you really the same people you have always known, or are they slightly different versions from parallel branches? How would you ever know? These philosophical questions do not have easy answers. They touch on fundamental issues about consciousness, identity, and the nature of reality that humans have been wrestling with for thousands of years. Quantum immortality does not solve these mysteries. It makes them infinitely more complex. But maybe that is the point. Maybe the value of thinking about quantum immortality is not in whether it is true or false, but in how it forces us to examine our assumptions about life, death, and what it means to exist. It is a thought experiment that pushes us to consider the deepest questions about human experience. What this could mean for our future. Let us imagine, just for a moment, that quantum immortality is real. What would that mean for humanity's future? How might it change the way we live, the risks we take, and the societies we build? The possibilities are both exciting and terrifying. Scenario 1. The age of extreme risk-taking. If people became convinced that quantum immortality was real, we might see an unprecedented era of human risk-taking and exploration. Think about it. If you believe you will always survive in some universe, why not attempt things that were previously considered impossibly dangerous? We might see explorers volunteering for one-way missions to distant planets, knowing that while they might die in most universes, they will experience success in at least one. Scientists might conduct incredibly dangerous experiments that could advance human knowledge but have a high probability of disaster. Athletes might attempt feats that seem superhuman, banking on the slim chance of success in their survival universe. This could lead to rapid advancement in human achievement. We might colonize Mars decades earlier than expected, not because the technology is safer, but because enough people are willing to take the risk. We might make breakthrough discoveries in physics, medicine, and technology because researchers are no longer held back by safety concerns. But there is a dark side to this scenario. A world where people believe they are immortal could become incredibly reckless and dangerous for everyone else. If you think you will always survive, you might not care about the safety of others. Traffic accidents could skyrocket. Dangerous activities could become commonplace. Society might struggle to maintain order when people feel they have nothing to lose. Scenario 2. The quantum inequality. Imagine that by 2050, we develop technology that can actually detect or influence quantum branching. Maybe we create devices that can measure which universes we are in, or even influence the probability of ending up in favorable branches. This technology would likely be expensive and complex, available only to the wealthy and powerful. This could create an entirely new form of inequality, not just between rich and poor, but between the quantum immortal and the quantum mortal. The wealthy might use quantum technology to ensure they always end up in the best possible universes. Not just surviving, but thriving. They might bias their reality toward universes where their investments succeed, where they avoid accidents, where they remain healthy and attractive. Meanwhile, ordinary people would be left to experience whatever random quantum events naturally occur. The gap between the quantum elite and everyone else could become so vast that they are essentially living in different realities. This raises profound questions about fairness and justice. If some people can manipulate quantum probability while others cannot, are they still part of the same moral universe? Should there be laws governing quantum manipulation? How do you regulate technology that operates across multiple realities? Scenario 3. The consciousness revolution. Perhaps the most fascinating possibility is that studying quantum immortality could lead to breakthrough discoveries about consciousness itself. If our awareness really does choose which quantum branch to follow, then consciousness might be a fundamental force in the universe, like gravity or electromagnetism. This could revolutionize our understanding of the human mind. We might discover that consciousness is not just produced by the brain, but exists independently and uses the brain as a kind of quantum antenna to navigate between realities. This could lead to technologies that enhance consciousness, allow communication between parallel versions of ourselves, or even enable us to deliberately choose which quantum branch we experience. Imagine being able to tune your consciousness to experience only the universes where you are happy, successful, and fulfilled. It would be like having ultimate control over your destiny, not by changing reality, but by choosing which reality you experience. But this power would come with enormous responsibility. If you could choose to experience only positive outcomes, what would happen to your growth as a person? Would you become isolated from suffering and struggle, the very experiences that often make us more compassionate and wise? Scenario 4. The Great Awakening. Finally, consider the possibility that widespread acceptance of quantum immortality could lead to a spiritual or philosophical awakening. If people truly understood that they might be living forever across multiple realities, it could fundamentally change how we treat each other and our planet. Knowing that every choice splits reality might make people more thoughtful about their decisions. If every act of kindness creates a universe with more kindness, and every act of cruelty creates a universe with more cruelty, then our moral choices take on cosmic significance. People might become more compassionate, knowing that the suffering they cause affects real versions of people in parallel universes. Environmental protection might become a much higher priority, as people realize they're not just protecting one Earth, but countless Earths across the multiverse. This could usher in an age of unprecedented cooperation and care for one another, as humanity grapples with the weight of infinite moral responsibility across infinite realities. The emotional reality check. As we come to the end of our journey through the concept of quantum immortality, I want to step back from all the science and philosophy and talk about what this really means on a human level. Because regardless of whether quantum immortality is true or not, thinking about it changes something inside us. There is something both beautiful and terrifying about the idea that we might never truly die. Beautiful because it suggests that consciousness, that spark of awareness that makes you you, might be more resilient and fundamental than we ever imagined. Terrifying because it raises questions about the nature of our experiences and relationships that we are not sure we want answered. I think about all the close calls I've had in my life, the times I almost stepped into traffic, the illnesses I've recovered from, the accidents I've narrowly avoided. Were those just lucky coincidences, or am I actually experiencing the echo of countless quantum branches where things went differently? It is impossible to know, and maybe that is for the best. What strikes me most about quantum immortality is how it reflects our deepest human desires and fears. We have always wanted to live forever, to avoid the finality of death, to ensure that our consciousness continues. From ancient myths about the afterlife to modern dreams of uploading our minds to computers, immortality has been humanity's greatest obsession. Quantum immortality offers a version of immortality that is both more and less than what we have dreamed of. More, because it suggests we might already be immortal without needing any technology or divine intervention. Less, because this immortality comes with no guarantees of happiness, health, or meaning, just endless survival in increasingly unlikely scenarios. But maybe the real value of thinking about quantum immortality is not in whether it is true. Maybe it is in how it makes us appreciate the preciousness of this moment, this experience, this version of reality we are sharing right now. If there really are infinite versions of you living infinite lives, then this particular version, the one watching this video in this universe at this moment, is unique and special. Every choice you make, every relationship you build, every moment of joy or sorrow you experience might be creating ripples across the multiverse. Your life might matter in ways you have never imagined, affecting not just this reality, but countless others. Whether quantum immortality is real or just a fascinating thought experiment, it reminds us that existence is stranger, more complex and more wondrous than our everyday experience suggests. It invites us to live with more intention, more compassion, and more appreciation for the mystery of consciousness itself. So the next time you have a close call, the next time you narrowly avoid danger, take a moment to wonder how many other versions of this moment are playing out across the multiverse, and how grateful should you be to be experiencing this particular version of reality. In the end, whether we are quantum immortal or not, we are here, we are conscious, and we are part of something much larger and stranger than we can fully comprehend. And maybe that is the most beautiful truth of all.